This is the video I've been aspiring to make. So far, I've had the pleasure of sharing life and culture at the studio, but I've been trying to get access to show the behind the scenes of how our games are made. And finally, starting now, that's what I'm gonna do. That's right, a new branch of the vlog is here. Now, I'll still be doing life at Massive, but in work at Massive, I'll be getting closer to the craft to share more on how games are actually made. Now, this first episode is focused on something that I've touched upon slightly before: sound design. More specifically, for Avatar: Frontiers of Pandora.
When it comes to the sound design pillars, we worked under the same ones as the VO team and the music team. Creating an emotional attachment, immersing the player in an empowered Navi experience, and creating accessibility with depth. The first two of these go hand in hand, as we wanted the world to feel alive, rich, and responsive in a meaningful way to players' actions. We wanted to make sure that what would otherwise feel like an alien moan would instead feel tangible and relatable, where every plant, animal, and biome made a sound that felt like the result of the evolutionary path that took place in that corner of Pandora. All of this needed to be scaled, keeping in mind that your character is a 3 meters or more tall Navi with extraordinary power and agility. The last pillar, accessibility with depth, speaks to a more game-oriented side of the soundscape, where we didn't want to simply bombard the player with information in detail if it was unnecessary, but rather we wanted to design sounds in a way that they were instantly recognizable, for example, dealing damage, taking damage, and so on and so forth. But we also wanted to make sure that we would prioritize these correctly based on the context. So if you're in battle, you're going to be hearing sounds that you don't hear during an emotional beat in a quest.
So, with such a big subject, covering everything from music and ambience, character audio, the amount of work required, work trips, recordings, etc., it's impossible to cover everything in just one episode. So, I'm gonna focus in on one specific niche to show the amount of work required and the dedication needed to make sure that you nail all of these important, minute details. So, let's meet Henriette.
For Avatar: Frontiers of Pandora, I have mostly been working with the main character and how the character sounds like when you move and jump and fight and swim through Pandora. We call it Foley, but before we go into details with how the main character sounds like in our game, let's define what Foley really is. So in movies, Foley is defined as all the sounds you have to re-record in a sound studio after the movie has been shot. But in our game, Foley is more narrowly defined as all the movements that our character makes as you jump, fight, and swim through Pandora.
Now, since this is a vlog, I like to show, not tell. So, I've asked Henriette for a little demonstration to see just how important character Foley is. So, let's see what the game feels like without any Foley.
Okay. So, I'm going to mute all the Foley. So now we won't hear any sounds of the player at all. Okay, let's see. Found some harvestables here.
Yeah, already just running and jumping around, it doesn't feel like you're there.
I know, it almost feels like a dream, right? Let's go to another location. Okay.
It feels so unsatisfying. You have this big jump and then just nothing.
I know. Let's take a swim.
Oh yeah, no like interactable with the water either.
No, it's almost like you didn't exist.
Which is kind of funny because when I thought about character Foley, I thought, yes, the sounds made by the character, the grunts, the jumping and that stuff. I didn't think of it as, the audio from the things that you're interacting with in the world being part of that.
Yeah, I know. We like to think of it that Foley is also like how you, the player, affects the world as well. So shall we listen to the game with only Foley?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, already, like, it's so quiet. Pandora isn't supposed to be so quiet.
No, right? Yeah, it's a bit odd.
Yeah, now that's what I'm talking about. And back for a swim. Yeah, like you feel the footsteps through the water.
Yeah, it's great. Let's listen to some punches again.
Oh yeah, moving through the leaves.
Yeah, there's a lot of leaves in our game. We went through a big deal to make them all sound very different. So Foley for games is a little bit different than working with Foley for movies. In a movie, you work with a linear medium. You know exactly what's going to happen when, and you can place your sounds accordingly and make them play exactly when you need to. But in a game, it's a bit different. We have so many different players with different play styles, and we never know exactly what's going to happen, so we have to implement the Foley in a much more systematic way. Let's take a giant leap of faith.
Ooh, slight vertigo. And that hurt, yeah.
Yeah. So if this had been a movie, one take of this landing sound would have been enough.
Yeah, because in the movie it's linear, you know exactly what you're landing on. You have, you know how many leaves, what a tree trunk. You just do the one perfect sound for that one perfect take.
Yeah, so in this example, we had to have at least 10 variations of this specific landing sound. So our two Foley artists, Sarah and Robin, had to redo this again and again.
That's a lot of jumping.
Yeah, recording Foley for games is very demanding. Yeah. So the main character in Avatar Frontiers of Pandora is a bit different than most player characters you'll meet in video games. First of all, you play as a 3-meter tall Navi, so you're much taller than a human being. And secondly, you're much stronger, so the Foley sounds had to sound much heavier and bigger than a human being. But we don't want the player character to sound like a huge giant that is stomping around the forest either. So the question we had to ask ourselves was, how can we make the player character sound bigger and heavier than a human being, but also gracious and agile at the same time? And in order to achieve that, we decided it was best to get some additional help. And we're super grateful that the two Foley artists, Sarah Monat and Robin Harland, could join us and help us mold the player character's sonic style.
Now, the process of taking those recordings and modifying them so they sound like a Navi made them is varied and intricate. But let's see an example of how we go from this to this.
Let's take the jump one more time. This time, let's land on. Let's use this plant here to help us. So this time, I didn't take damage.
Yeah, and you could hear when you were landing on the leaves and slight little grunt, and you felt like you were being slowed down and kind of dampened.
Yeah, so if it wasn't for the sound of these leaves curling and bending as you move through them, it would be very hard to know exactly why the landing went so good. Another thing you can jump into is water.
Oh yeah, and I can imagine that comes with its own set of challenges.
Oh yeah, let's have a listen.
You know what, I can't tell you how many times I've been playing games and I've been jumping into water and diving around, and I've never once thought like, oh yeah, all of those sounds also need to be recorded.
You're correct. And we tried to record all the water Foley inside the Foley studio first. But it was quite demanding to make it sound realistic, like it was really happening outside in a forest. So we decided to redo all the recordings outside in the Swedish countryside.
Oh, okay.
It was cold, but we were very happy with the result. And one thing especially that we tried to emulate was a realistic underwater Foley. So for example, the sound of all the smoke bubbles that is brushing around you when you dive. We wanted that to sound very realistic. And we had to do some experiments. So one experiment we tried was putting a very expensive recorder in a food container and just dip it underwater.
Just dunking it.
And just praying that it wouldn't break. And luckily it didn't, and we were quite happy with the result.
Or if it breaks, at least the recording is fine.
You're right. Let's have one more listen.
Oh yeah. Yeah, that is such a nice detail. When you come up, you feel, you know, the water and the bubbles kind of rolling past your ears.
Yeah, that's what we try to achieve.
So one thing that I want to bring up and touch on, I remember from the podcast that I did with Alex, talking about just how systematic the sound is. Because when you talk about the character Foley and all the recordings needed, but you can't record every single variation of everything interacting with each other.
Correct.
So how does that work in the game?
Correct. So I want to show a great example of that now. Do you see all these stones here? These stones will play regular stone footsteps when you walk on them. But we wanted them to have something extra. So we want them to sound a bit loose and wiggly as well when you walk on them. And in order to achieve that, we had to use a sweetener system that we made. And I'm going to turn that on now so we can have a little sneak peek how it looks like behind the scenes.
Oh yeah, wow. It should be said, this is not a part of the regular game. We're in dev mode right now. But yeah, so this is a visual representation of?
All the sweeteners we have added to the loose stones in this area of the game. And every time you enter one of them, you will hear that extra loose stone layer on top. Shall we have a listen?
Yeah, let's take a little walk.
Okay, I'm going to solo the footsteps so we can hear them in all their glory.
Yeah, you can really hear that little extra movement of these loose rocks rubbing against each other. And it's not always the same one. There's like variations between that as well.
Yeah, correct.
Now, Henriette, I want to thank you so much for the presentation, but I think just to tie it all together, you talked in the interview about, well, you're a Navi, you're huge and heavy, but still graceful, and most importantly, barefoot. Can you tell me a little bit how that kind of, is manifested in the game and how you put importance on it?
Yeah, it was really important for us to emphasize the player's bare feet. And especially around the bases where you are fighting the RDA. So the RDA will wear boots, of course, but when you move around, you can clearly hear your bare foot as a part of the footsteps design. Let's have a listen. Not only are you strong and capable, but you're also ditching human equipment, and I think that's very important to get through.
Yeah, and it's actually it's interesting because I mean, Navi, when you're in the woods, for us as humans, that feels kind of alienating, like being in the woods. But as you're playing as a Navi and you're in the human environments, that's when you get a little bit of that alienating feeling, like you don't quite belong.
Yeah, and that's correct. You don't belong, and that's what we try to achieve.
And there you have it. I hope you have a better understanding on the role and the process of character Foley and its implementation in Avatar Frontiers of Pandora. Let me know what you think about this new format and more importantly, which aspects of game development you want to learn more about, and I'll do my best to make it happen. See you on the next one.